an extra special welcome to this session to any new RDA members that we have here. It's great to have you. Please do join the group on the RDA website just as soon as the technology allows you to do so. So we do have collaborative session notes for this session. So please do follow that link and add your name to the attendee list. That it'll really help us out if you do that. But you'll also find on that document a link to the Metadata Interest Group webpage. You'll find a link to the RDA Code of Conduct, and you'll also find a link to the slide deck that we're using, and links to the various documents and sites that we'll be talking about. I'll be reposting this link in the Zoom chat every so often, so don't worry if you don't manage to get it down before I progress to the next slide in about now. So as I said just before the recording began, we are a new refreshed team running the Metadata Interest Group for the first time at this session. So I'd like to begin by giving a word of thanks to Rebecca Koskela and Keith Jeffrey for their past leadership of this group. But as we are a new set of co-chairs taking this interest group into the next phase in its history, we thought this would be a good opportunity to take stock of the activities that we've accomplished and been engaged in so far. So we've highlighted a couple of these in the agenda. But more importantly, we want to agree with you, the group members, on how we're going to proceed from here. How do we progress with our current activities? Are there any new activities that we should be focusing on? So I'm hoping that we'll get some good discussion going in the course of the next hour and a half. And don't forget, if you don't feel brave enough to contribute vocally during the session, you're always more than welcome to pop something into the Zoom chat and contribute in that way. Before we go any further, I think we, the three co-chairs, each ought to introduce ourselves. So I'll go first. My name's Alex Ball, and I'm the Research Data Systems Librarian at the University of Bath.
Hi, I'm Steve Richard. My background is in geology, but for the last 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot of work with metadata and data catalogs. I worked on the XML implementation of ISO 19115-3 and with an NSF catalog projects with the EarthCube initiative, working with schema.org metadata, and more recently I've been working on metaphysical sample metadata with the iSamples project, and also on the cross-domain interoperability framework World Fair project with Simon Hodson and Arifan Gregory and a bunch of other people on a cross-domain interoperability framework, which involves a lot of the metadata specification stuff that I'd like to integrate into what we're doing here in the interest group. So I'm based in Tucson, Arizona. Over to you, Milan.
I'm Milan Oistracek from University of Maribor. I also work a lot with metadata and with semantic interoperability of metadata elements on different research areas. Now I work in genomics, but before I have worked also in other areas. But also I am responsible for our national open access infrastructure, and we have our own metadata element set, which is used in our repositories.
So thank you, Steve Milan. So I will now stop sharing my screen so that Steve can take us into the next part of the meeting.
So we have three main items that we want to discuss here today. I'll start with presenting the renewed charter. The initial charter for this interest group was created, I think, in 2007 or something. I actually lose track, but we have updated that and I'll discuss the main points in that. Then we'll have a review of the products from the previous work of the interest group and the ongoing activities that Alex and Milan will cover. And then we'd like to have a discussion discussing priorities for work items for the interest group moving forward. And there we go. So in the interest, just diving right into the charter, these were kind of the main points in the charter document. And there's a link down here for the current draft of the charter document. It's a Google document. There's a bit.ly link as well. But the main points of the objectives are identifying and endorsing metadata solutions, focusing on the development of recommendations for improving quality and interoperability of metadata, and a forum for communication between the various RDA work groups, of which there are several involved in metadata activities of various sorts, but also with other activities outside. There's an EOSC metadata framework that Milan's been working in. I mentioned the cross-domain interoperability framework in the World Fair project that I'm working on. There's lots of these things going on, and just trying to provide a forum where people doing these activities can get together and we can find out what other people are doing and hopefully reduce duplication of effort and harmonize activities so we don't end up with inconsistent recommendations within RDA and between RDA and other activities. So those are the main objectives of the interest group as outlined in the charter. If people have suggestions for other objectives that we should add, please let us know, add them in the document as comments or in the notes for the meeting here. So what's the mechanism of operation? Continuing in the way that the interest group had previously worked, we schedule regular meetings in conjunction with the RDA plenary meetings. The interest group chairs, that's myself, Milan, and Alex, will formulate agendas, but we're looking for input from any member, any interested party on things that would be useful to have discussions with in the meetings. We can also schedule other meetings at any time, working sessions, and I think this would probably be a good way to actually get work done, is having sidebar meetings with working groups focused on particular issues. Membership is open to any RDA registered member, so please join the interest group if you're interested in metadata. And then we also invite representatives from other work groups that are working on metadata issues to participate in the interest group, so we can coordinate activities across RDA. So that's the operational mechanism. And then the outcomes we're looking for. So this is now diving into the work that's been done or is ongoing. So one of the original outcomes from the work group was a metadata principles document. There's a link for it in here as well that outlines kind of some basic principles for what metadata is about and what it's for. That document is essentially complete, although we could, if we wanted to, return to it and update that if people felt that would be useful and necessary. The other outcomes and ongoing activities now, I'll turn it over to Alex to talk about the metadata catalog, and then Milan will talk about the metadata element set work that's been ongoing for several years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex. If there's questions, please put them in the notes or in the chat. We'll have a discussion at the end of the presentations. And so there should be time to bring up any questions. You're still muted, Alex.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so the metadata standards catalog. This has been something that's been of long-standing interest to this group, and for those who haven't come across it before, I'll introduce you to what it is, what it's for, and how you're able to contribute to it. So What is it? The first sentence on the homepage tells you that the catalogue is a collaborative directory of metadata standards applicable to research data. And that's quite a short sentence with an awful lot packed into it. So to help unpack that for you, it should be possible to use all of the standards in the catalogue to describe research data. Now, that's a whole other presentation and discussion that we could do about what research data actually means. But in a nutshell, we're typically thinking about the recorded output of an experiment or an observation or a simulation, something like a numeric table or an interview transcript. So schemas that are only used to describe things that aren't like that aren't really in scope. So that's why we don't include records for things like FOAF, which can only be used to describe a person. The other thing is we're concentrating on whole metadata schemes. So we're thinking about things that describe research data using a prescribed set of fields. That's either properties with values or relationships to other entities. These are the predicates in linked data triples or XML elements. While schemes can mandate how to represent values using controlled vocabularies or ontologies or special encoding schemes or mandating particular types of identifier, it isn't those value schemes, those ontologies or encodings that we're cataloging. It's the whole fields, the sets of fields. We're also not including generic data serialization methods. So we wouldn't be including, for example, XML as a whole concept or JSON. We're also not cataloging things that are kind of pure data formats without any kind of metadata fields in them. It is really, we're concentrating on, as I say, sets of fields, properties and relationships. Having said that, we are generous about what counts as a standard. We by no means require that any scheme in the catalogue has been approved for use by a recognized standards body. All that we ask is that it has been used independently by more than one group. It sort of points towards it being a kind of de facto standard. Having said that, we do include profiles that have been written for a particular use case, but which draw their elements from these more general metadata standards, because that's actually the right way of doing things. If you want to document data to suit a particular use case, you want to be drawing your elements from wider sets in order to from wider standards in order to maintain interoperability. And it's important that they're in the catalog so that they are exemplars for best practice. The original motivation for the catalog was to help research support staff like me to advise researchers on the best metadata standards to use to document their research data, because this is the kind of question that comes up when the researchers are devising their data management plans. But more than just pointing people towards specifications they can use, we wanted the catalogue to be a resource that would actually make a real difference and enable researchers to implement these metadata standards in practice and use them in their own work. So going beyond just having information on the specifications, we also provide links to sample records that comply with the metadata standard. We link to repositories that use these metadata standards to document their holdings and that build services on top of these metadata standards. We also collect information on tools that researchers can use to work with these standards, whether that's a piece of software that lets researchers type their documentation into a web form or a dialog box, and then it converts that into a metadata file for them, or a library that they can use with a programming language in order to manipulate records in these standards. We also collect the mappings and crosswalks between metadata standards to kind of reassure researchers, if nothing else, that they will be able to document their data using a metadata standard, write it once and use it everywhere in multiple different use cases, because the mapping will allow it to be translated into multiple contexts. Now, we've been engaged in this activity for quite a long time now, and in that time, developments have happened in the community, and other resources have become available that deal with very similar use cases. So we've been evolving new use cases for the catalogue to support. So one of the things we're interested in is being able to provide the catalogue as a resource for the sort of academic study of metadata standards, and put them in their own historical context. And we're working towards being able to support the deeper analysis of metadata schemes and being able to compare them sort of side by side as a first step towards supporting people to create new crosswalks and mappings between metadata schemes, which is quite an ambitious and difficult thing to do. So the more help that we can give people, the better. So I've put this slide in here just to put the whole activity into its full historical context. The catalogue is the third incarnation of this resource. The first one was developed by the Digital Curation Centre at the end of 2012, and it was released at the beginning of 2013. The RDA quickly saw the value in it and worked with the DCC in order to develop it in two ways. First of all, to widen its focus from being sort of aimed initially at UK higher education, making it relevant to the whole global research community. And the other thing was to introduce an element of community maintenance. And because of the result of the working group involved, the metadata standards directory was released on GitHub pages the following year in 2014. This current third incarnation of the catalogue came about as a way to satisfy more ambitious use cases. Unlike the earlier versions, the current catalogue has an API for machine-to-machine interaction. And because it's a dynamic web application, it gives us a suitable basis on which to build these more sophisticated services that we have planned. And the catalogue has seen adoption by several different projects, the European Fairs Fair project, and also some postgraduate research at the University of Victoria and Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And that's been possible because the code is open source. It's released on GitHub. Under an MIT license, and released as under the CC0 waiver, which means that it can be used freely in a wide variety of contexts without restriction. But you know, this information does rely on the community, and that means you, to help us keep it up to date. It was never meant to be just a one-person job to do it. There is a page telling you all you need to know about contributing, but rather than read that out to you, I actually want to show you, demonstrate how easy it is to contribute to the metadata standards catalog. And so I'm now going to put myself at the mercy of the technological powers and see if I can actually do this live. Right, so let's say you're browsing through the catalog and you go find the DataCite metadata schema, and you'll see that under the version history, it's telling you that version 4.4 is current. Well, that information is now out of date because another version has since been released. So we'll now try and do something about that. We'll click the sign in button. This is the sign in screen. If I click on sign in with RDA, it will take me to this login page. This is the same one that you use for logging into the RDA website. Right, and now I am signed in. The first time you do this, it will ask you to create a profile, but it's a very minimal profile. It just has your name and an email address, and that's the kind of minimum information that we need in order to log the changes that you make in the version control system. So if I return back to the DataCite page, we now have some extra buttons that have appeared. If I go right down to the bottom, there's one here that says add another version. So I can click on that. And there's little bits of help text that come up when you navigate into one of these fields. So what we need here, we need the version number. We want the date that that version was released, which was back in January. Now the page that describes these new versions generally have a human readable document and an XML schema. So we can put these in. That's the specification document. That is the XML schema. They also very helpfully provide some examples of how to use it. So this is the one that is in XML. They started providing them in JSON as well. So let me copy these links in. And the specification document has been given a DOI, as has the XML schema. So I can then save those changes. And if I go back down there, you can see that the new version is now there. So that's how easy it is just to add a new version to an existing record. It's a very similar process if you want to add an entirely new metadata scheme, or to add one of the mappings or a metadata related tool, an organization that either supports the standard or is a repository that uses it, is an example of it being used in practice. And we also collect information on where these standards have been endorsed. If you're interested in using the information in the catalog in a different application, there is a link at the top here to exploring the API, and that is not going to help me. So, oh yeah, there we go. So there it is. It's on Swagger Hub, and so you can play around with it and explore the API there. So that was everything I wanted to demonstrate to you. The link to the catalog is in the collaborative notes. But before we go any further with that, does anyone have any questions on that.
Zachary have a question. Can you describe how the metadata standard catalog is similar to and different from the fair sharing standard registry? Also, if applicable, do they share entries or is there a federated search across them?
Right. The fair sharing has a different scope. Fair sharing does have does catalog things like the vocabularies and ontologies that are useful in documenting data. The particular fields that we collect are different. We don't share any information directly, partly as a matter of legal interoperability. It's just a little bit hard for us to be able to track because the information in fair sharing is released under a Creative Commons attribution license, which means that whenever information for fair sharing is used, it has to be attributed back to fair sharing. Whereas, as I mentioned before, the data in the metadata standard catalog is CC0, so there's no requirement for attribution there. We haven't implemented any cross searching, but I believe we do both have API, so that wouldn't be difficult for somebody to implement if they were interested in doing that.
Couple other questions.
There is also some other thing. One thing is do you take into account if a metadata schema is actual fair, in the sense if they reuse fair vocabulary and object properties?
We don't provide currently any fields for providing an assessment of how fair particular research metadata schemes are. If that's something that people would find valuable, then that is certainly something that we could look at introducing.
And another thing, Alex, could you talk a little bit more about the catalog Swagger API functionalities and who it is aimed at?
So what the functionality of the API, you can, it's a REST API, so you can retrieve all of the information in the catalog by means of API calls. You can do those without, if you're just getting information from it, then you can do that without authentication, but you can also do the other sort of CRUD operations for creating and updating and deleting records through the API, but that requires an authentication. So you'd have to get in contact with us in order to get a separate API account for that. And who will be aimed at? I mean, the API has been used, for example, in DMP Online, again for this the use case of somebody trying to they've been prompted in their data management plan templates to say how they were going to document their data, what metadata standards they will be using. And so by looking up standards that are relevant to the researcher's domain, they can get a list directly from metadata standards catalog of the available standards that they could use.
Do you have also a list of metadata editors and editors to produce metadata records based on those schemas?
Well, I think I might need clarification on what the question is, but we do have for each of these metadata standards a list of organizations, and usually that's repositories who use these in order to catalog the data that they hold. And so the idea is then you can click through to there, you can see how they're using the standard, and if that might be another avenue to explore if you have any questions on the finer points of using these standards in practice.
I think there is no questions more. Maybe I will share my screen.
Okay.
How to achieve interoperability between data islands. We have huge amount of data, and we want to do interoperability between these data silos. One thing is, if we use common language with common vocabulary, with common ontologies, it is possible to connect, for example, data sets between each other, or data sets with software, etc. So simple metadata or data interoperability principles are that we need to use for metadata and data formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge presentation. We need also to use vocabularies that follow FAIR principles, and we need to include for metadata and data qualified references to other metadata. This is in these FAIR interoperability principles. And for describing results of research, for example, papers, data sets, etc., software, we need a formal presentation of this with metadata. We also need to have a binary file. We need to have interfaces to this digital object. Also, we need services which use these digital objects, and the most important thing is we need globally assigned identifier. So this is the most important thing. Persistent ID we need, like digital object identifier, like ORCID for researchers, etc. And this digital object is possible to aggregate into collections. And also what is important, if we want to check validity and unchangeability of digital object, we need a checksum. We need also a transactions chain, especially if we work with sensible data, for example. We need also rights, access right, who has possibilities to use this. Also, we need a license. We need information about provenance. We need rich metadata for description of digital objects, and for different types of digital objects, we need different metadata schemas. This is the most important for FAIR digital object, and there is some features, important features. Digital objects should be described using standard commonly accepted semantic artifacts formats, and also protocols used for for sending digital object from one node to another. Important is that formats are open and also protocols are opened. Also important is that that people or researchers has possibilities to understand, but also that machine understand this digital object. In a lot of cases, we need also an open application programming interface that allow other systems and applications to access and integrate this digital object. Also, important things are rich metadata for fundability, for reusability. So this metadata needs to describe content, structure, and context. And important thing is that digital objects need persistent identifiers, which are globally unique. This is very important if you want to cite this digital object and also that machine will use this digital object. But there is also other important features like if we have comprehensive and clear documentation, if we implement versioning of the digital object, if we include information about the provenance, if we implement a validation check to assure the quality and correctness of digital objects. And also important is that we need to store these digital objects into trustworthy and accessible repositories. Long-term preservation is also one of the most important features. Now, all of you know a lot about metadata standards, but where is problem in metadata standards? They describe digital objects and in different, they use metadata elements in different granularity. For example, creator is possible to describe in W-core with a string. In data site is described with name, surname, persistent identifier like ORCID, affiliation, etc. So the same is with description. You have different types of descriptions. And this is critical problem which we need to take into account if we want to aggregate metadata for in search engines, but also it's important if we want to reuse this digital object. There is a lot of information about metadata standards. I choose part of this information. One is guidelines for publishing structured metadata on the web from RDA. Alex told about this RDA metadata standard catalog, and also on questions fair sharing is mentioned, and also Digital Curation Center list of metadata standard is one good source, but there is also some other links. The same is with control vocabularies. There is many different sources of control vocabularies, which we, how I say, we encourage that for every metadata element for which is possible to use this different vocabularies for different domains. And there is, how I say, some catalogs and some sources like DDI control vocabularies. They have built their own vocabularies in social science. The same is with CESDA vocabularies. And another problem is metadata mapping. How we map one metadata element to another metadata schema element. We have field-to-field mapping. For example, in one metadata schema, you have name, in another you have title. Then we have value mappings where we, for example, map one data value from one scheme. For example, we have gender. In one scheme is a male, in another is M. Then we have business rules mapping. It is possible to map, for example, string to geolocation if you have a program to do this. But you need also assistance from the human. Then we have ontology mapping, where you have different relations between different ontologies, same as, similar as, etc. And it's possible to map one metadata, one ontology element, for example, class, attribute, a label to another. And so also in RDA, we have in this metadata standard catalog, we have also catalog of metadata standards mappings. What is another thing? Another thing is if we need to have fair digital objects, we need a PID graph for describing relations between digital objects. Every digital object needs to assign a persistent identifier, and it is possible also to assign relations between each others. For example, on figure A, we have a relation between two versions of software. On the figure B, we have in one repository two datasets. And this third example is we have a project and we have different digital objects which are results of this project. For example, scientific paper, data, etc. And for measurement of research results with open research graphs, we have many initiatives. The most important are, for example, OpenAlex, OpenAirGraph. Also, DataSite has their own database, and Crossref has their own database, and Microsoft Academic Graph, etc. I also prepare some links, and I also recommend scientific knowledge graph interoperability framework. This is product of one research, one working group in RDA, and I think it will be, I hope, de facto standard in few years, especially in discoverability area. If we want to find, for example, what is for researcher important. If I have a hypothesis, I need to find research data, I need to find research papers, and also I need to find, for example, software and other research results which are most suitable for my research. And with these scientific knowledge graphs, if we prepare metadata on according to this schema, I think we will have. Maybe I will make one we have a lot of how I say, a lot of different classes, and it's good for interoperability between different schemas if we have possibilities to transfer metadata into, for example, this format. What is important in the process, how to make fair digital object? We need to verify this digital object. We need to analyze this digital object, define semantic model, make that our digital objects is linkable between with other digital objects. We need to assign a license for usage. This is very important for reusability. Also, we need to define who has possibilities to access this digital object. We need to define rich metadata for digital object, and we need to deposit digital object to the repository. This is important life cycle, and it's never-ending story. For every object, we need to verify. We need to make verification. And now I will tell something about our RDA metadata element set. You can find this RDA metadata element set on the Google Drive, and for every metadata element set, we have a description, and we have also some mappings to other. So, but what is maybe important? We will need help to improve this RDA metadata element set recommendations, because you know this is from 2014, and it has been edited and improved, but now we need also additional metadata element set. We haven't terms of access types, we haven't rights type, file type, resource type, version, distribution. I think that, but also we need to improve also quality of this text. And another thing is I started in EOSC interoperability framework, also with recommendations of minimum metadata set for repositories and data archives, and I use this RDA metadata element set as start metadata element set, and I have seen a lot of problems, and I have done a crosswalks. I use also crosswalks from other crosswalks, and product has been this crosswalk of most used metadata scheme and guidelines for metadata interoperability. In this crosswalk, I compare this RDA metadata interesting group recommendation of the metadata element set and also some others. Maybe I will show a little bit this crosswalk, but if you will want, you download the crosswalk and see what I have done. For every metadata element set, I compare metadata elements, and you can see that, for example, in RDA metadata interesting group recommendation, we have originator. In data site, we have more granular description of the same metadata element. The same is for the other metadata schemes. It is good for if you want to do a mapping, and for some mappings is from one metadata schema to another is possible to do simple translation from one, for example, in Dublin Core and in DCAT 2.0, you have one-to-one translation. But if you want to translate, for example, from Dublin Core to Creator, you need a function to find, for example, a researcher, and for example in ORCID, and populate these attributes. Also, what is important, there is also some vocabularies which is used, for example, in data site. Also, there is another vocabularies, for example, from Crossref, from OpenAir, and also some other vocabularies. So there is a lot of information which is possible to use. It's a little bit outdated because now our newer versions of metadata schemas and guidelines, but it is also useful today. And the last thing is with knowledge from these crosswalks, we have prepared EOSC minimum metadata set recommendation. This EOSC minimum metadata set recommendation for metadata interoperability is in Appendix 1 in EOSC interoperability framework. But there is only textual description. On this link, you will find also an Excel file with more comprehensive description of metadata elements. The main part are this fair digital object with metadata elements, but some metadata elements are more granular. For example, project reference have more elements, term of access has more elements, rights types, file type, location. And also another thing is some metadata elements are mandatory, some are recommended, some are optional. Also, we have different types of fair digital objects. These parts are, for example, very good described in Crossref metadata element set. So we have not present this part on this Excel, but for others, we present a data set, we present a service, software, and workflow in this Excel. Maybe I will show this Excel a little bit. What we have in this Excel, we have property definition, how this property influence on fair, which types or values is used for this description, cardinality, if this metadata element is multilingual, and also there is an example, and we also add requirements level, and also type of metadata, and from where we use a definition. Also, it's important from which source you use definition, because on different sources you have semantically different definitions. And this is same for all other. And also we have the same for agent, same for relation identifier type, same for location type, same for project reference, for rights types, for terms of access, file type. And also we present vocabularies which we have used in this Excel. Now versions of vocabularies are different. For example, this core resource type genres is now 3.0, but in very new future will be 4.0. So everything is in development through time. So we need also to do this. And why I present this? Because I think we need help to produce maybe a little bit, I say, newer recommendation for minimum metadata set, not only for element set, not only for general digital object, general features of digital objects, but also maybe for some domains and also for cross-domain. This is all from me. Do you have some questions? I will stop sharing. One thing is I'm missing the metadata schemas for ORCID, ROR, IGSN, Crossref, DOI. We haven't, but for example, for agent, we use ORCID, ORCID metadata elements, of course. For example, for the same is for ROR and for grid, we use in agent. In agent, we use elements from these metadata schemas. Also, I think Crossref DOI is specific for Crossref DOI is specific for this research papers, monographs, etc. And we have attributes for this. We also in Crosswalk we have analyzed also Crossref, and also we have analyzed DataCite.
I think that comment does bring up an interesting question, though, because, in Alex's, at least as far as the catalog, the presentation was that the scope of the metadata we were interested in was about research products. And I think ORCID is about people, ROR is about organizations, IGSN is about physical samples. So do those count as research products? I think they're not really data sets. I think it'd be, do we want to expand the scope of the catalog to include description schemes for these other kinds of resources?
But what is important, we use, for example, from DataCite, from Crossref's elements, for example, for agent. Also, some we use from DDI, for example, some from the open air, but some are optional, some are how I say mandatory. So, but it is impossible to include all metadata schemas for all things. But for example, we have used also Serif for some research infrastructure because it is the best for describing, for example, research infrastructure.
Let's see. Well, if there's no near-term questions, I guess I'd like to move on. I was just going to speak briefly about what we've been doing.
Question, sorry.
Hi, go ahead. About
Yeah, my question is this a proposal or is this something
I
that
see.
will involve more communities to review what you have done so far? Because I'm going to review it from my point of perspective because I'm working also on this stuff, so I'm not sure what status has this document now.
This document is proposal maybe for interact for this interest group work. Maybe we will work on one working group for maybe improve this recommendation. And also we wish to include all communities to give some recommendation. Also, we wish to include, for example, this scientific knowledge graph community, because in scientific knowledge graph they have concentrated only on discoverability, not to other aspects. For example, for reusability, for interoperability, and we need also this part of description of fair digital objects. For example, you're working variables in your working group.
I adopt this.
Also interesting part.
So it is possible to still contribute or say something about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the same is with, for example, description in DDI about variables, and in cross-domain interoperability framework. I think there will be a lot of possibility to glue together things and to prepare good recommendation.
Speaking of that, I'm gonna dive in with the cross domain. So this, I just wanted to speak briefly about this activity that's been going on in the World Fair project with the cross domain interoperability framework, CDIF, which I think is closely related, obviously, to the stuff we've all been doing. But the goal for what we've been trying to do is we have all these, recommendations, and different people are doing things different way. And so for somebody coming into this new, which is what, was observed in the various World Fair work items in different domains, people don't know, okay, what do I actually do? And so what we wanted to do was come up with a set of a framework for implementing FAIR principles, not just the highfalutin, let's be nice about stuff, but how do I actually do it? And so, we're in the metadata interest group. The metadata is the key, and there's, we've talked about the content requirements, which are the element sets. You need a serialization. And the other issue that comes up is, well, how do you make the metadata visible for aggregators to harvest the metadata and get it into catalogs so people actually find it when they go and look in whatever their favorite search engine is. So within this framework, the aspects of this FAIR problem that we're addressing are the basic discovery questions, which aggregators use to construct search indexes, and we're looking at specific implementations. for this. And so for the basic discovery metadata right now, we're looking at schema.org, all the serialization using JSON LD. But then there's the question of access and how do people actually get a digital object once they find something they're interested in. And at there's the simple level of the URL and you just get it. But what we're trying to delve into that a little bit deeper for dealing with sensitive data, which is a big issue with a lot of social science data, where there are actually processes you might have to do to get permission to use something. There are different levels of aggregation, anonymization, protection of personal information. And so for implementing this kind of metadata, we're looking at using the open ODRL, Open Digital Rights Language, as the implementation. Then in terms of data integration, how do I actually, once I get the data, I find it, I access it, I want it to be interoperable and reusable. I want to use it. So the whole question of data integration. And for doing this, we need more granular and precise descriptions of the data structure, syntax, what's the semantics of the content. And for this, we're looking at using the CDI, the Data Documentation Initiative Cross-Domain Integration, DDI-CDI scheme, which has just recently been completed in the DDI project. And there's been a very structured way of describing data that we can get in here that would allow a machine actionable description of a data set to start automating some of these data integration problems. And the fourth aspect of this is the whole question of provenance. And so how do you support trust? How do people assess fitness, whether some data set or digital object they find is something they can use? And right now, this is still kind of a wide open topic. We have the W3C Prov, but we really haven't delved into this because it seems like there's still a lot of change and update going on in this realm. So anyway, so this is just a real high overview of the kind of stuff we're doing here. We have a basic set of recommendation document that's going to be submitted to the European Commission as a World Fair deliverable at the end of this month. It'll be in Zenodo. We have an initial document about our discovery platform, which talks about these minimum metadata requirements and also looks at here's a proposal for how to do the serialization using schema.org. That's in Zenodo here already. The links are at the bottom, have links for the other specs here. So this is an ongoing project. And our approach, as I mentioned, we want to make actionable recommendations. We want to build on existing web technology, harmonize with existing practice where we can. And this is where my interest, my involvement with the metadata interest group here is really, pursuing this, is how do we build this framework, not just with this World Fair project, but also look at the other work that Milan's been doing and lots of people, and use the metadata interest group to bring these activities together to be able to recommend specific ways of doing things that people could use as sort of cookbooks for being fair. The focus is on digital objects, as Milan explained. And like I say, the first report, which is in draft form now, and we're reviewing it. It'll be delivered to the commission at the end of May and will be on Zenodo. There's a couple other documents on Zenodo also about this cross-domain interoperability framework activity in general, if you're interested in. So that's another activity that's really closely related to all these things that we're interested in metadata. And now I guess I'd like to launch into the where does the interest group grow from here discussion. And I think already we've heard a couple of potential activities. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And in the notes for the, let's see. Notes. Okay. I would just start, maybe we can brainstorm a little bit here in the notes document, which I'll put the link in the chat again for those of you. Also just put it up here. So there was Barbara had brought up earlier this idea that with these FAIR Corp or EOSC metadata, I think that's something that Milan's been working with. So there's all this work that's been done there. How do we integrate that with our existing catalog and element set? How do we harmonize that with what's going on in CDIF? There's been a lot of discussion about mappings. I think there's actually a separate RDA working group looking at mappings, but how do we actually use these metadata mappings to get beyond having, you know, a table in a Word document or a spreadsheet that shows the correlation between the elements? How do we actually set up machine actionable descriptions of these mappings to try to actually start automating some of this stuff for real frictionless integration of metadata and to streamline discovery and access to the data? And so your thoughts, any comments or suggestions, ideas, other things we should be looking at, concrete things we can do? Milan, where do you see the work you've been doing? I mean, you have all the spreadsheets with a huge amount of information compiled and correlated. I mean, for instance, all those vocabularies, is there any kind of vocabulary service that's available to access and use those? Are there SCOS representations for those? Would that be useful?
For example, which vocabularies are the most, how I say, useful? For example, I work also in core vocabularies working group, and there is resource type vocabulary, which is very well used in almost all repositories, and they the same is access rights and some other vocabularies. But in social science, we have DDI vocabularies, and also in astronomy they have very good vocabularies in almost all domains. For example, in biomedical science, they have problems that they have too many vocabularies. Every research group has their own vocabulary, and they need a lot of mappings between these vocabularies to understand each other's. But I think this is another working group which will also be, it will be important that they will work also on this how I say on this research. But also I think who is important, maybe fair digital object form. They have a lot of specifications which is possible to use. Especially this part is interesting about operations standards, how to add metadata for which operations is possible to use for some digital objects. There is a lot working groups. Yes, mapping of working group is of course very important, and I hope that we will collaborate on next maybe on next plenary. I think that we will need to invite other working groups and to exchange ideas how to prepare better specifications.
And
Barbara, I see.
Yes.
Barbara.
I wanted to say that actually I'm quite happy that there will be fair mappings, because I had always the problem to be sure that I know all the possible schemas or ontologies where I can find my object properties to make fair metadata. It's really quite impossible to know everything, yeah? So it can happen that then we recreate controlled lists that actually exist, but there is now a nice way how you can make it interoperable. So, or there will be a nice way, because you can say, okay, I have this term, I have this property, and this maps to another one, and I can, so because it's impossible that I can find everything on one spot and take it from there. It will always be a mix. But then it's my duty to make it interoperable, and we have to really train people to do this correctly. And there was not, so a training is absolutely important. It is important to have like needed steps to accomplish fair metadata. It's really about fair metadata. It's not only about metadata, it's also about what does it mean to have fair metadata. What are the requirements for that? It's also not only about making it interoperable. It's much more than that. So that's an area where I work a lot.
So in terms of possible activities, concrete things we could do, like this idea about training, I don't know, could the interest group organize workshops or maybe make video webinars of some sort about, what is actual fair metadata with some real examples of, let's look at this metadata record and think about, is it fair or is it not? I mean, you brought up the question earlier for the metadata, the standards catalog, is there any assessment of if something is fair or not? Well, how do you do that? What are the concrete things that you look at to decide is something fair or not?
Well, I'm teaching this, so I have quite many ideas about it, but it's absolutely open to discussion. So how to do this, and what are the minimum requirements, not only for interoperability but also for fairness.
Would that be a good interest group activity to actually have a workshop or run some kind of, webinar or something about, with sort of concrete examples of what makes a metadata record fair?
One thing is also important, one aspect, I work with this sensitive data. You need informed consent from participant or from patient. You need ethical approval. You need authorization and authentication. Who has possibilities to use? What is possible to use? There is a lot of ontologies which is possible to use, but we need to do also some recommendation on this area. I know that also some working groups work on this, and we need to include also these groups.
Mm-hmm. So another possibility for a concrete activity, let's say, so there's a possibility of doing some seminars or webinars of some sort about what does fair metadata look like. Another one that we have this element set, and do we want to pursue making progress on that? And one way to do that might be, again, to just sort of have sidebar work group meetings with people that are interested in refining particular elements in that element set, and really going in and trying to clean up and update what we have in the element set. And so, that would give us a way, if we had sort of a monthly work group meeting on the element set or something and just pick 2 or 3 elements that we were going to work on, to refine and update. Would there be any interest in that? Does that fit in with anybody's current project work, for instance? No, Alex, what are you thinking, in terms of moving ahead with the metadata elements? Do you think that would make sense?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the thing with the metadata element set is we have our set of sort of high level elements. The intention always was to flesh out the detail within them and unpack all of the different types of metadata that these elements group together. And that's been the kind of stumbling block for making progress, is to get the people together who can actually look at one of these elements and really get into the detail of the kind of sub elements and sub elements that are needed within it. So if we can get a group of interested people to work on just one element and flesh it out, that would be really useful progress to make.
In my looking at the element set descriptions, it seems like the ones I've looked at all sort of there's kind of discussion items in there where there's various comments and people put things in, but there are things that obviously need resolution in some fashion to sort of come up with okay, here's the consensus, at least among some group of people. And maybe, we're not going to be able to claim to have brought together all the relevant experts on these. We don't have the resources to do that. But I think with the element set, if we just if we get a group of people together to work on one element, and we can say, okay, here's the people who were involved, and this is what we came up with, and that would be at least truth in advertising. People could decide, okay, do I believe these guys? Do I think these people know what they're talking about? Do I like what they came up with? And then people, and then it could be used. I don't think we're going to be able to convene any kind of giant convention where, we get everybody in the world together to come up with some kind of, won't get any consensus, right? You never could with these things, but some sort of majority opinions even are going to be hard, but just sort of informed descriptions would be useful.
Yes, and I think trying to pursue some abstract truth is going to be impossible, but if we can at least aim for something that is maximally useful for the sort of original purpose of being able to identify particular interesting bits of metadata that might occur in different places in different metadata schemes. If we can at least get that far, then we'll have produced something of worth.
The next plenary is coming up in Costa Rica, I think, for the physical meeting. And, in the context of the face-to-face meetings, would it make sense to have, try to schedule something like a working session on either, on the catalog, the standards catalog. There's various topics that we could, I think getting together with the work group that's looking at mapping would be useful. Just thinking about what kind of sessions we might schedule for the face-to-face plenary coming up. Does anybody have any ideas or suggestions about what would be good priorities for thinking about what to do in a face-to-face meeting coming up? Emmanuel.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to second what Alex just raised. That's what keeps me busy actually most of the time, is to identify the common elements in the different metadata schemes, because I have the feeling that a lot of these schemes, they are they keep rephrasing the same stuff in different ways, which actually destroys interoperability perfectly. So that's why I mentioned the PID systems in the chat, because I think that's at least one part of the administrative metadata, which is relatively easy to harmonize across all systems if they are in the metadata set, if they are in the standards, or if they are kind of in the system. So what we should think of is like this, remember this shell onion system where we have like the general metadata outside, and we have the more discipline-specific data in the inside, and so then to define different layers for different disciplines, I think would be a big step forward. You know, like for example, yeah, as I said, people, institutions, instruments, you know, and then dive deeper into methods and so on, you know, and just to define that schema and try to figure out how can we create these onion layers, and how can we then go from there into the details. I think that would be great to at least define that a way how to achieve that, you know. And to define what is the redundant data and what is the discipline-specific data, because I think that's one of the big difficulties we deal with.
Can I ask Emmanuel if you agree that for the domain-specific metadata, there are still some lags, so that there's not everything yet defined. So I agree that for definability, there is too much and too much overlap. But there is still something more to do in domain.
Of course. Yes, of course. I mean, that's the problem we have, is that the disciplines define their own their own specifications and their own specifics, but they also define their general information again. You know, so that's what I like with this onion concept, is that that we have. And I think we can only start with these general administrative data with the interoperability. You know, that's where we have to start. We should not start with the particularities, you know, with the details. That will probably not work. And I think what everybody desperately longs for are the scientific use cases where we can actually create additional benefit. You know, and that's something that we will have to show with the metadata, because what our goal in the end is to build graphs with that, and you know, the graphs you can only build with nodes and so on and so on. I mean, I think we're all starting to go that direction at some point. So we're looking for connections between the data. That's why we are here.
One thing is maybe important about this metadata element. For example, I work now in one project where we consolidate different genomic metadata standards, and for example, you have sex and birth, you have sex, gender, for example. They use different vocabularies, and these metadata elements have different semantic meaning, and it's hard to glue together. For example, in I have worked in one social science project. They have vocabulary with more than 10 types of gender. This is hard to align together, but I think in domain they need to talk about this, what is important for them.
All righty. It looks like we're about at the half hour or whatever. I think our time's about up. I guess thanks everyone for participating, and we're looking for input, and we'll be tossing around ideas for the upcoming plenary. And I know, Barbara, maybe we might be in touch about some kind of webinar about what does fair metadata look like. And I think the group chairs here will have to get together and analyze what we've discussed and learned here.
Yes.
Any other closing remarks?
Well, thank you for the interesting presentations. That was great.
All right. I learned a lot.